Under the cold lights of the pharmacy, I gripped the pen tightly, my heart pounding, never imagining my meticulous nature would lead me into a nightmare. The numbers on the inventory sheet silently revealed a sinister conspiracy lurking behind the hospital's flawless facade. Each minor discrepancy felt like a deadly whisper, pulling me deeper into a perilous spiral. I had always believed precision was my shield, but now it had become the blade at my throat, threatening to shatter my career and my trust. Who had set this trap? The secret I'd uncovered could topple everything. But when confronting it, would I emerge victorious? Or be swallowed by the very place I'd trusted the most? I never thought my greatest strength, my attention to detail, would someday become my greatest curse. In the bustling pharmacy of one of New York's largest hospitals, precision was more than just a virtue, it defined my existence. As a senior pharmacist at 32, colleagues often joked, half seriously, that Olivia Harris could spot a mislabeled pill bottle from 20 feet away. I'd smile at their playful exaggerations. But behind the teasing lay genuine respect. I remember clearly one morning, as I was meticulously cross-checking incoming invoices against our inventory logs. A young pharmacist named Emily paused beside my desk. "Olivia, seriously, how do you do it?" she asked, admiration evident in her eyes. "Everything you touch seems to fall perfectly into place. It's just practice," I replied modestly, adjusting my glasses and returning a quick, friendly smile. "And maybe a dash of obsession," Emily laughed warmly, shaking her head. "Whatever it is, we're lucky you're here." Yet, that Tuesday morning was different. Beneath the usual comforting hum of fluorescent lights and distant chatter, something unsettling emerged. My fingers paused over the keyboard as I stared at a small inconsistency on the screen, a shipment marked received yet oddly absent from the physical inventory. My heartbeat quickened slightly, suspicion tugging at the corners of my mind. Initially, I dismissed it, mistakes happen. But soon enough, I discovered another discrepancy. Then another. Each discrepancy was subtle yet deliberate, like breadcrumbs carefully hidden along an unfamiliar path. A sinking feeling settled deep within my chest as I realized these weren't mere errors, they were deliberate manipulations. As clarity slowly dawned, a chill ran through me, colder than the New York winter outside the windows. The only person who had the authority and intellect to orchestrate something so sophisticated was Mark Reynolds, my mentor, boss, and the one person I'd entrusted my career to. The realization felt sharp, a betrayal buried beneath layers of respect and trust. Mark was charismatic, admired by everyone from interns to directors, but now I saw beneath his polished facade, a quiet voice inside warned me this wouldn't end well. But I reassured myself truth, precision, and integrity were on my side. How desperately naive I was, unaware that my own meticulous nature was already a tool in his hands, ready to be wielded mercilessly against me. As I stared at the inventory report spread neatly across my desk, unease gnawed softly at the edge of my consciousness. It was subtle at first. Just slight variances, a missing box of antibiotics here, some expensive cancer treatments there, easy to overlook individually, but impossible to ignore once seen collectively. I leaned closer, my eyes narrowing as I traced my finger over the lines of print. Feeling my pulse quicken, each entry was precise, clinical. Yet something about them felt deliberately altered, as if meticulously crafted to remain inconspicuous. I hesitated, fighting the urge to jump to conclusions. After all, my reputation rested on accuracy and caution. Accusing someone wrongly, especially someone as respected as Mark Reynolds, could ruin careers, friendships, and trust. And Mark was meticulous himself. Everyone knew that. Yet the thought lingered, stubbornly clinging to my mind. Who else had the authority or the insight necessary to manipulate these records? Taking a deep breath, I methodically began cross-checking batch numbers against the delivery records again. triple-checking my work, hoping quietly, almost desperately, that I was mistaken, but each verification only deepened the suspicion. My heart felt tight as I glanced nervously toward Mark's closed office door, distant laughter from the hallway suddenly sounding hollow in my ears. "Stay calm, Olivia," I whispered under my breath, forcing logic to override fear. Yet a cold realization settled within me. Someone, perhaps someone very close, was orchestrating this quiet deception, and I had unwittingly stepped into the middle of it. My careful nature had once again proved essential, revealing truths that were safer hidden truths that now placed me directly in danger. By early evening, the pharmacy was deserted, the quiet punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights overhead. My eyes burned from hours of relentless scrutiny, tension coiling tighter around me with every minute. As my finger traced batch numbers line by line, a sudden wave of nausea rose sharply in my throat, forcing me to pause and steady my breathing. It couldn't be real, but the evidence was unmistakable. Batch numbers carefully erased, subtly altered, precisely duplicated, each modification executed with surgical precision. Mark's precision. As I sat frozen, heart hammering painfully, an old memory flickered unbidden into my mind. It was Mark who'd personally advocated for my promotion 2 years ago. I remembered vividly the proud warmth in his eyes, his supportive hand on my shoulder, guiding me confidently through the intimidating halls of senior management. "I trust Olivia more than anyone here," he'd said, his voice firm and unwavering. "She's the most meticulous and reliable pharmacist we've ever had." The memory twisted inside me like a knife, the irony of those words almost unbearable now. I fought against a wave of dizziness, hands trembling slightly as they hovered over the keyboard. Another disturbing thought emerged suddenly: Mark's peculiar behavior yesterday, his lingering gaze when he passed by my desk, the strangely probing questions he'd asked about my weekend plans. Had he already sensed my suspicion? I shook my head, forcing myself back into the moment. Fear pulsed coldly beneath my skin. Mark Reynolds, my mentor, my protector, was not just deceiving the hospital, he was deceiving me. God, how did I miss this? My voice was barely audible, tight with anguish and disbelief. In that painful instant, I knew there was no turning back. I had to expose this betrayal. But even as I resolved to confront the truth, a darker realization chilled me to the core. Mark knew I was onto him, and he'd already begun plotting my downfall. In all my years at the hospital, I'd never met anyone who commanded respect quite like Mark Reynolds. His presence alone could silence a noisy conference room, his calm voice effortlessly steering even the most chaotic discussions back to order. Tall, poised, and always impeccably dressed, Mark had a disarming charm that left everyone from nurses and pharmacists to senior executives in quiet admiration. Yet beneath his polished exterior lay a sharp, calculating mind. He was known for his extraordinary ability to navigate hospital politics, always knowing precisely whom to befriend, what favors to grant, and which battles were worth fighting. Watching him operate was like witnessing a master chess player, each move subtle but deliberate, every gesture serving a hidden agenda. A few months ago, I'd observed him soothing a panicked hospital director with a calm assurance after a critical medication error had nearly sparked a lawsuit. Within minutes, Mark had redirected blame, protected his team, and emerged not just unscathed but praised for his leadership. That day, I'd marveled at his skill now. Recalling it, I saw it clearly as manipulation disguised as grace. Since discovering the fraudulent shipments, every interaction with Mark took on a darker hue. I noticed things I'd overlooked before: the subtle shifts in his tone when challenged, the calculated pauses that seemed to probe vulnerabilities, Yesterday's strange conversation replayed vividly in my mind how he'd casually asked about my plans for the weekend, his eyes briefly narrowing as if gauging the truthfulness of my reply. Standing at my desk now, staring at the closed door of his office, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. For the first time, I truly understood who I was up against a man whose charm was his weapon, whose intellect made him dangerously unpredictable, and whose power meant he could dismantle my life without even raising his voice. My heart tightened with resolve and fear in equal measure. Mark Reynolds wasn't merely my mentor or superior anymore, he had become my adversary. And my survival depended entirely on how carefully I played my next move. The next morning began with an uneasy stillness. As if the world itself was holding its breath, I stepped into the pharmacy office, tension pulsing in my temples. My thoughts raced relentlessly through scenarios of confronting Mark, each more daunting than the last. But before I could decide my next move, Mark appeared at my doorway, his face calm, composed almost unnervingly. So, "Olivia, can I see you in my office for a moment?" His voice was soft, measured. Offering no hint of urgency or suspicion, I forced a polite smile. Swallowing down my anxiety, "Of course," I responded evenly. Following him down the hall, every step felt heavier, echoing loudly against the polished hospital floor. Inside his office, Mark gestured me to sit, gently closing the door behind us. He moved silently to his desk, pulling out a slim folder and placing it carefully in front of me. My heart stilled at the sight of my own name printed neatly on the label. "I want you to explain something to me," Mark said quietly, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he opened the folder, sliding several papers towards me. "These discrepancies, they seem connected to your login credentials, your authorizations." My vision blurred momentarily as panic surged through my veins. I scanned the documents hurriedly. Shipment authorizations I never signed, transfer logs bearing my digital signatures, financial records that implicated me directly. It was all perfectly fabricated, devastatingly precise. Evidence that I myself might have believed if I hadn't known better. "Mark, this isn't mine," I stammered, struggling to maintain composure. "I didn't authorize any of this." Mark leaned back, studying me thoughtfully, his eyes devoid of warmth. "I want to believe you, Olivia. Really. I do. But the evidence here is overwhelming." In that moment, clarity struck with brutal force. This wasn't a spontaneous defense. It was an intricately crafted attack, long prepared and flawlessly executed. I'd underestimated Mark's cunning, assuming I held the advantage of truth. But truth had no power here, only perception mattered. And Mark Reynolds controlled that completely. A subtle, victorious glint flickered briefly in Mark's eyes. He knew he'd won even before the battle truly began. The conference room felt unbearably cold as I entered, every step echoing like a verdict against the polished marble floor. My colleagues sat rigidly around the sleek oval table, eyes cast downward, refusing to meet mine. My stomach twisted painfully. This was no ordinary meeting. "Please sit down." "Olivia." Mark's voice filled the tense silence, gentle yet commanding. I obeyed mechanically, my heart pounding erratically beneath my ribs. Mark cleared his throat calmly, deliberately distributing several sheets of paper around the table. "I've called this urgent meeting because troubling evidence has emerged, implicating Olivia in unauthorized shipments of medications." Murmurs and shifting gazes filled the room. The shock on everyone's faces stabbed into me, worst of all Emily, my closest colleague, who sat pale-faced, her eyes widening in stunned disbelief before she quickly looked away. Her silent betrayal hit me harder than any accusation could. "Mark, this is absurd," I stammered, my voice barely stable. "These documents are falsified. You all know me, I would never compromise patient safety." Emily flinched slightly at my words but remained silent, her gaze fixed firmly downward. Beside her, Michael, who I'd mentored since his first day, whispered sharply. Disbelief etched into his tone. Olivia, how could you? Those words pierced deeper than I'd imagined possible, leaving me breathless. My throat tightened painfully. I struggled to speak, desperate to reclaim control of the moment. Mark leaned forward, his expression carefully sympathetic, yet unmistakably victorious. Olivia, the evidence speaks clearly. Hospital policy requires immediate action. Your employment is terminated as of today. Pending further investigation, my hands shook uncontrollably. Cold sweat trickling down my neck as panic gripped me. My breath caught, vision blurring slightly. I searched the faces around the room for support, empathy, anything, but found only silence and avoidance. Mark's eyes met mine briefly, and behind his composed facade, a flicker of triumph surfaced unmistakably. He had orchestrated my destruction meticulously, every step calculated to isolate me completely. As security arrived, gently guiding me out, numbness overcame my panic. Mark Reynolds had executed his plan perfectly, stripping away not just my career, but every shred of trust, friendship, and dignity I'd ever possessed. The days leading up to the trial passed in a surreal blur. In my small, sparsely furnished apartment, the silence had become suffocating, amplifying the restless churn of my thoughts. Sleep had abandoned me completely, replaced by endless nights spent poring over every document, every transaction, every forged signature, desperately seeking anything that might salvage my shattered reputation. I meticulously arranged my files across the kitchen table, organizing evidence and rehearsing explanations until exhaustion blurred my vision. My mind constantly replayed the haunting silence from the conference room. Emily's averted gaze, Michael's accusing whisper. Each memory was a fresh wound. Yet strangely, each one also strengthened my resolve. In quiet moments of solitude, fear gave way to cold determination. My reflection in the mirror became unfamiliar eyes, red-rimmed yet fierce, posture hardened by betrayal. Mark had stripped away everything I had worked so hard to build, but I still had one weapon left, the truth. Sharp and unyielding, yet, beneath my outward resolve, anxiety lingered like a shadow. Mark Reynolds was cunning, meticulous, and dangerously persuasive. He would present his lies effortlessly, wrapping deception in charm, and the jury would be inclined to believe him. On the morning of the trial, as sunlight seeped through my apartment's dusty blinds, I stood alone before the mirror once more, adjusting my clothes with trembling fingers. I steadied my breathing, meeting my reflection with a final, firm nod. Whatever the outcome, I would not surrender quietly. I would fight, not just for myself, but for the integrity I had lived by. Yet deep inside, a chilling realization whispered softly no matter how prepared I was. Mark had always been one step ahead. The courtroom was unbearably quiet as I rose from my seat, heart pounding steadily in my chest. Taking a deep breath, I carefully outlined my defense, systematically detailing how each piece of evidence against me had been manipulated, falsified with painstaking precision. I have spent my entire career dedicated to accuracy and integrity, I said, voice steady, eyes meeting each juror's gaze earnestly. I have no reason, no motive to commit these crimes. For a brief moment, hope sparked in their eyes, but the prosecuting attorney stood smoothly, adjusting his glasses, a quiet authority radiating from him. Miss Harris, he began, voice deliberately calm. Let's revisit your claim regarding manipulated documents. Are you suggesting someone stole your digital credentials to orchestrate this entire scheme? Precisely, I affirmed firmly. Mark Reynolds had the necessary access and expertise. He raised a hand gently, interrupting with practiced ease. Yet the internal IT investigation found no evidence of hacking or unauthorized access to your accounts. Is that correct? My pulse quickened slightly. Yes, but Ms. Harris, he pressed, stepping closer. Your passwords, personal access codes, and authorizations were securely and uniquely known only to you. Correct. Yes. Technically so. Either Dr. Reynolds miraculously guessed your confidential information, or you authorized these transactions yourself. Isn't that accurate? I never authorized them? My voice trembled slightly. He paused dramatically, allowing the silence to deepen. A juror in the front row shook his head softly, clearly unconvinced. Furthermore, the attorney continued smoothly, now holding a sheet of paper aloft. We discovered unusual transfers to your personal accounts payments exactly matching the value of the missing medication. Can you explain that blood rushed hotly to my cheeks? I have no knowledge of those payments. They were clearly planted into your personal bank accounts, which you solely control. His voice was quiet but devastatingly precise. Do you understand how improbable that sounds to this jury? I struggled to respond, hands shaking visibly. I know how it sounds, but you must believe me, Ms. Harris. He cut in gently, shaking his head with exaggerated disappointment. There are facts, and there is speculation. Right now, all facts implicate you. Wouldn't you agree that blaming your superior is an easier narrative than accepting responsibility for your actions? No. My voice rose sharply, desperation cracking through my facade. You're twisting everything. Am I? He asked softly, glancing pointedly at the jury. Or are you attempting to twist the truth? Ms. Harris. I stood frozen, panic tightening its grip on me. Around the courtroom, expressions hardened with skepticism, judgment clear in their gazes. Mark sat back calmly, eyes holding quiet satisfaction as my carefully constructed defenses crumbled around me. Olivia? Mark finally spoke, voice gentle but cold, piercing through the tense silence. I expected better from you. Those quiet, devastating words sealed my defeat. Numbly, I sank back into my chair, my composure utterly shattered. The room spun around me as I realized that the truth had become irrelevant, overwhelmed entirely by calculated lies and ruthless manipulation. The courtroom held its breath as the jury filed back in, their solemn faces unreadable. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a frantic plea for mercy. As the foreman stood, his voice was steady, yet tinged with weary resignation. We have reached our verdict. Your Honor, in the case against Olivia Harris on charges of theft, fraud, and illegal distribution of medication, we find the defendant guilty. The word sliced through me, sharp and merciless. My legs trembled, nearly buckling beneath me. Cold sweat prickled down my spine, vision swimming in a haze of disbelief. Somewhere behind me, a muffled sob echoed faintly, but the sound felt distant, unreal. Instinctively, I glanced toward my colleagues, searching desperately for a glimpse of compassion. Emily's face was turned downward, shoulders quivering slightly as she wiped away a tear she couldn't hide. Michael stared rigidly at the floor, jaw clenched, avoiding my gaze entirely. Their silent anguish, subtle yet undeniable, drove the betrayal deeper. Mark sat calmly, expression flawlessly composed, eyes cool and victorious. He had anticipated every move, perfectly choreographing my downfall without a single misstep. The judge's voice cut sharply through my thoughts, each word heavy, final. Due to the severity and calculated nature of your crimes, Ms. Harris, the court sentences you to 10 years imprisonment and the permanent revocation of your pharmaceutical license. I gasped involuntarily, the room tilting dangerously around me. My hands shook violently as the harsh chill of handcuffs clicked around my wrists. The courtroom blurred into fragments of confusion and disbelief, the remnants of my once perfect life disintegrating rapidly before my eyes. In that moment, a single, bitter thought crystallized sharply within me. Everything I'd built my career, my reputation, my very identity was irrevocably destroyed. Justice had turned its back on me, leaving behind nothing but a haunting emptiness. As I was gently but firmly led away, my gaze lingered one final time on the faces I'd trusted most. Now forever marked by betrayal and regret, time moved differently behind prison walls, slow, monotonous, each minute stretching painfully into hours. The metallic clink of keys turning locks, the shuffle of guards' footsteps echoing down cold corridors, these became the soundtrack of my existence. Reminders of my grim reality, alone on my narrow cot. Eyes fixed on the peeling gray ceiling. Memories surged relentlessly, vivid and merciless. Among them, one haunted me particularly a night when Mark had stayed late, helping me correct a potentially dangerous dosage error that could have harmed dozens of patients. His gentle reassurance that night. "We all make mistakes, Olivia. What matters is integrity," echoed bitterly now, his hypocrisy chillingly apparent. My chest tightened with pain and disbelief, grappling endlessly with the depth of his betrayal. Had he planned it even then? Carefully cultivating my trust only to later use it against me? Each replay of this memory stung deeper, tearing away whatever fragile peace I managed to maintain. I reflected bitterly on my naivete, my blind trust in Mark and the colleagues I'd considered family. Emily's quiet tears, Michael's careful avoidance, these memories remained raw. Bleeding wounds, reminders of my foolish trust. Was my downfall inevitable? I whispered into the suffocating silence. Or did I willingly place my trust in the wrong hands? The question hung unanswered, haunting me nightly, eroding any shred of remaining optimism. The weight of betrayal had transformed into a deeper, more unsettling realization. Perhaps my meticulous honesty, my strongest virtue, had always made me vulnerable to deception. Outside my barred window, shadows lengthened across cold concrete, signifying another endless day slipping away. Each passing moment stripped away more layers of who I once was, leaving only bitterness and regret behind. In the darkness of my cell, I acknowledged the harshest truth: there was no redemption. No justice, only the cold, relentless ache of betrayal, and the knowledge that I had trusted too deeply, too carelessly. My life, carefully built through precision and integrity, had unraveled completely. Now, all I had left were memories of trust shattered beyond repair, and the haunting realization that honesty had been my greatest enemy. In the suffocating solitude of my prison cell, sleep became my enemy rather than relief. Each night, I found myself trapped within relentless nightmares that forced me to relive every painful moment: the jury's indifferent verdict, Mark's composed triumph, Emily's quiet sobbing, and Michael's accusing silence. The echoing word guilty haunted my sleep, jolting me awake into a cold sweat, heart racing as though I were drowning. Days became an endless cycle of pacing, anxiety, and tormenting self-reflection. Memories surged relentlessly, mercilessly replaying the subtle clues I'd missed, the opportunities I'd squandered to protect myself. How could I have been so blind, so vulnerable? How did I not recognize the danger lurking behind Mark's reassuring smiles? Beneath his seemingly genuine mentorship, each recollection twisted like a knife within me, drawing out fresh waves of nausea and despair. My stomach churned painfully every time I pictured Mark's calculated calmness at the trial, how effortlessly he'd manipulated everyone around us, A bitter taste filled my mouth at the realization that his deception had been perfectly orchestrated from the start. Anger, sharp and burning, consumed me, but it always faded quickly, replaced by an overwhelming, paralyzing sense of helplessness. At my weakest moments, dark thoughts of vengeance slipped silently into my consciousness. Seductive, yet immediately impossible. What could I do from within these walls, stripped of any power, influence, or voice? Each imagined scenario dissolved quickly, leaving behind a bitter, hollow ache, a stark reminder of my complete impotence. Occasionally, I'd hear distant sounds of life beyond the thick walls, the hum of passing cars, faint laughter carried by the wind, painful reminders of a world continuing without me. My isolation was total, absolute, and brutally evident. I'd stare at the cracked ceiling for hours, wondering bitterly whether anyone still remembered me, or if I'd already faded entirely from their lives. I caught my reflection in a distorted, scratched mirror one bleak afternoon, hardly recognizing the ghostly figure staring back at me. Hollow eyes, sunken features, every line and shadow told a story of defeat and betrayal. Is this really who I've become? I whispered bitterly to myself, my voice quivering, weak, nearly unrecognizable. In those quiet hours, I confronted the harshest truth: my unwavering honesty and meticulous integrity, qualities I had valued above all, had left me utterly vulnerable, defenseless against calculated treachery. The values I'd cherished most deeply had betrayed me in the cruelest possible way. My bitterness hardened into resignation as weeks bled slowly into months, my hope fading quietly into permanent despair. I stopped searching for justice, stopped believing in redemption, recognizing finally that both were illusions I'd clung to desperately. What remained was nothing more than a cruel, endless cycle of reflection and regret. A relentless internal war without ceasefire or resolution, curling up tightly on my threadbare mattress, knees pressed into my chest. I stared vacantly into the darkness. Tears no longer came. There was only emptiness now. A cold, unyielding void that had settled deep into my core, my old self. The ambitious pharmacist driven by principles and perfection had ceased to exist, leaving behind nothing but the lingering shadows of betrayal, despair, and the bitter realization that my honesty had been the very weapon used to destroy me. Gradually, the relentless storm of anger and despair within me gave way to quiet resignation. Days passed without distinction, each one blurring seamlessly into the next, empty and devoid of meaning. I no longer resisted reality, I simply existed, drained and defeated, an empty shell of my former self. In rare moments of reflection, I would recall the woman I once was: confident, meticulous, respected by colleagues, and driven by an unshakable belief in justice. The stark contrast between that memory and my current state: a silent figure confined within gray walls, shoulders hunched, eyes vacant, was painfully clear. It felt as if I'd become a stranger to myself. The ambitious pharmacist reduced to a faded ghost trapped by betrayal and injustice, sitting on the edge of my cot. My body felt heavier with each passing day, a persistent exhaustion seeping into every muscle and bone. Sometimes I'd sigh softly, the simple act of breathing an effort, as though even my body had surrendered to the futility of resistance. The future, once full of potential and possibility, now stretched out before me as an endless void. Thoughts of freedom no longer brought hope, only a vague sense of dread, a realization that even if released, I had nowhere left to belong. My reputation, my career, my very identity had been thoroughly dismantled, leaving nothing behind but emptiness and isolation. As shadows deepened across the bare walls, I leaned back against the cold surface, eyes closing gently, my breathing slowed, the quiet rhythm becoming a somber acceptance of reality. This was my life now void of justice, truth, or redemption. Acceptance wasn't peace. It was merely surrender, the final acknowledgement that my fight was over, ending neither in victory nor vindication, but in silent, inescapable defeat. Years drifted slowly by, indifferent and quiet. From within my isolated world, I occasionally caught whispers from beyond these prison walls, news of former colleagues' achievements, weddings, promotions, and new beginnings. Life had continued seamlessly, effortlessly. Without me, each piece of news felt like a small blade cutting softly but persistently into old wounds, reminders of how thoroughly I'd been erased, forgotten, and left behind. Most painful were the occasional updates about Mark Reynolds, promotions, awards, public recognition. Each accolade only deepened my lingering despair. His life thrived without blemish, untarnished by guilt or regret. The stark injustice of it left me hollow, endlessly questioning the fairness I once naively believed existed. In the quietest moments, lying awake in the stillness of my cell, a persistent thought haunted me. Had anyone ever believed in my innocence? Had even a single voice spoken up on my behalf, protested my sentence, or doubted the official narrative? The likely truth, cold, relentless silence gnawed at me relentlessly, an unbearable realization of my utter solitude. One evening, as the fading daylight surrendered to darkness, I closed my eyes, exhaling a bitter sigh that carried all the weight of my lost years. A faint, humorless smile crossed my lips, ironic and resigned. What a cruel lesson life had taught me, integrity rewarded with betrayal, honesty answered by ruin. I thought briefly about the person I had once been, a dedicated professional, admired and trusted, now reduced to mere shadows, echoes of a life I would never reclaim. As the final trace of daylight vanished, leaving only thick darkness surrounding me, I acknowledged the bleak reality. My imprisonment wasn't confined merely within these walls, nor limited by a sentence. It stretched endlessly, permanently within me, a punishment deeper and more profound than any physical confinement. In the enveloping darkness, a final acceptance washed over me, quiet and absolute. I would never escape this injustice, never recover what had been taken. My story had become a silent warning, a haunting caution against misplaced trust, the vulnerability of truth, and the tragic cost of innocence betrayed. Thank you all for watching this video. Please comment and let me know what you think about this story. Please like and subscribe to watch more great content on my channel.